All right, folks, welcome back. We literally the power like blinked out like randomly right as we were just about to start, and so it came back on. So I made the same joke that I think Zevi did, is that the forces of Sitra Achra are trying to keep us from studying the Zohar, but we'll do it. Also, if you'll notice, I'm not using my normal setup. I'm actually in Cleveland. My sister-in-law had a baby, and so we were here for the baby naming. And so I'm sorry if my audio and video are not quite as good as usual. I hope you'll forgive me. But other than that, Zevi, any thoughts from last time? Welcome back.
Good to see you back here. I think there's going to be all kinds of forces at play that are going to try and keep us separate, but we will prevail. And we're doing this from different locations, but it's been just really great to, and I think I've said this now every week almost, to recenter and to like almost a forced break from the whatever's happening during the day, during the week. Zohar comes and the Zohar will be there, whether the Sitra Achra, whether the dark forces like it or not. We will get together and we will read the Zohar.
Yeah, with God's help, with the help of heaven. So, any thoughts from last time?
I feel like we dropped off in the middle of this intense battle that's raging, and I think the battle is only going to continue to escalate and evolve in interesting ways. And I've read ahead a little, obviously, and I've seen how a lot of the themes that we've been seeding throughout are going to continue to germinate and blossom, quite literally, as we advance. I recommend for those that are popping on for the first time to at some point go back and either read or watch with us, because really where it's the text is so interwoven and in a very beautiful way, and there's not too much I can say before continuing, but as we continue there's going to be a lot of the past that's going to come up as well.
Right. Yeah, anyone who thinks that the Zohar's narrative is accidental is really mistaken. Like, it's a very tightly constructed, that it takes a bird's eye view, I think, to see it. Like, if you just dive in, you'll never notice it. But I think as you really get into it, you really begin to see it textually beginning to evolve and unwind. But I guess the only thing I'll say is that we've been dealing with this question about sitting at the table and eating with the Yanuka. And I guess that the one thing that people should know is that central to all Jewish meals, right, is bread and wine. And so we've spent a lot of time in breadland, right, with Teruma and Tenufa and all the talking about bread. And so of course now we have to spend some time in the land of wine. And I guess what is interesting about that to me as we transition to talking a lot about wine is that it makes some sense for a kid to talk about bread. I mean, if my kids, they absolutely love, challah. They could eat. They would eat challah just for dinner if they could. They would eat bread for dinner. But it's interesting that now we'll transition to talk about wine from a child, right? That's something interesting about the idea that small children get a little bit of wine on Shabbat, maybe. Is this kid a sommelier? Like, what are we? And then also maybe he is, but maybe the wine that he drinks is not the wine that, maybe it's a different kind of wine, supernal wine. So, but I guess speaking of that, supernal wine, I guess we should open.
I think we should go right for it.
Let's do it.
We should taste some of that wine for ourselves.
Yeah, we should taste some of this wine for ourselves. A good warm up for a Shabbat. So, I guess I'll patach, I'll open, I guess, and then we'll go from there.
Please.
So he opened, namely the Yanuka. On the vine, 3 tendrils. As she was budding up came her blossom. Her clusters ripened into grapes. This is from Genesis 40:10. So this is the vision of the cupbearer of Pharaoh that Joseph's interpreting. Up till here, vision of the matter. From here, his own vision. As it was written, Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, etc. But the vision of the matter was for Joseph's sake, to inform him so that Joseph would hear and know. So Matt's helpful line here is what the Zohar is saying is the line on the vine, three tendrils. That's the actual ikar of the vision, right? That's actually the vision, right? And the later part, the later part, Joseph Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. That's what the actual cupbearer is doing. So it looks like that's part of the vision in the text, but that's not according to the Zohar. The essence of the vision is on that. But the vision of the matter was for Joseph's sake. The vision was not for the cupbearer, right? The dream was actually for Joseph's sake, to inform Joseph of it. So that Joseph would hear and know. It's an interesting thing, Zevi. We typically think of visions and I guess dreams as meaning something for us. Like if I have a dream or a vision, I typically think that means something for me. It's interesting the idea that we could have a dream or a vision for someone else.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating. Like we live in such a me-centric world where like my dreams must mean something about me. Sort of psychoanalytic, like
right.
working some kind of psychodrama.
Right.
It's the idea that someone could have a dream or a vision, and that vision not be for them.
Yeah. What I loved about this as well is that the vision is coded. So there's two ways to be reading it, and there's one person who's the butler, the cupbearer, who hears the dream, but he only hears what he's supposed to be hearing, which is there's two sort of matters here that we're distinguishing.
Right.
And when he tells it over to Joseph hears something that was encoded for Joseph in the dream of the cupbearer.
Right.
There's this almost like this veiled, there's this veiled message or this cryptograph that he's receiving, and he doesn't know that he's telling it over in a way that's going to be heard differently. And we're going to begin to unpack what those two different, what's the coded message that's in this dream or this vision.
Right. And I think that's, the Talmud, as folks may or may not know, the Talmud has a lot to say about dream interpretation, in that a dream not interpreted is kind of lost or wasted. And so there's a lot about dream interpretation in the Talmud, although it's actually debated. Some scholars in the Talmud think it's rubbish, and some think it's it's like many things. But also, it's interesting that we love to tell people our dreams, but we don't want to hear anyone else's. You notice it?
I didn't notice that until you said it, but now that you said it, yeah.
We want to tell everyone about our dreams, but no one wants to hear anyone else's. But this is maybe an encouragement from the Zohar. Be careful to listen to other people's dreams, because other people's dreams may not
be for you, right?
Maybe for you.
Yeah. I mean, for those that are familiar with this section in Genesis, it's all about dreams. So Joseph is in prison; he's interpreting the dreams of the baker and the butler, and then he goes on to interpret Pharaoh's dream, and this is the beginning of the redemption arc in his own personal journey.
Right.
So it's very laden with this theme of dreaming, right? And Joseph himself is the dreamer, right? He's the one who has the dreams of the stars and the dreams of the sheaves of wheat, and his brothers say, "Here comes the dreamer," with
right.
So it's a very, very rich area with a lot of exploration. I think what's fun here is that Matt does something very nice in his translation, which is that on the three vine tendrils, as she was budding, up came her blossom, her clusters ripened into grapes. The translation is quite nice, because if you look at some other standard translations of the verse, it will be "it was budding," because we're talking about the object, the vine. And he personifies the vine with a she, which in English can work because we can refer to objects as a she, right? But by doing so, he tips us off to what the true matter or the Josephian side of the dream, where she is obviously the Shekhinah, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I appreciated the way that he put that into the translation itself.
Right. And people should hold on to there are three tendrils, right? So we're going to have to identify what the three tendrils are, and there are also three verbs, right? There's the budding, the coming up, the ascending, and the ripening. And those three. So if three tendrils are going to represent something, and then the three verbs are also going to tell us something about the action there. So, and again, I love this in some sense, right? That it's kind of a throwaway verse in many ways. This is not if you're reading this in the narrative, you would never think, that's the verse I should hook onto. But of course, the Zohar finds the large things and the small things.
Yeah, that's very true. It's interesting because even when I read this text the first time or even the second time, I'm not exactly like, you read a verse from the Bible and you kind of like, okay, it's a biblical verse, like you kind of like skim over it. But the Zohar is like, no, like do not skim over this. Like it's very, very precise and important for the text here. I realized I noticed last time in the chat that people were asking what Shechina is. I think it might be helpful to introduce. So Shechina is the divine feminine, that of the divine which is indwelling, which manifests in our world. She's going to be a very popular. She has been a popular character throughout, and when we refer to she'll be popular again. So for those that hear the word Shechina, they should know what we're talking about.
Right. It's the God that we encounter in this world. It's the immanent God, and it's also the lowest Sphira Malchut.
Right.
All right. So we've learned. I love how it introduces "we've learned" as if everyone knows this.
Common knowledge, yeah.
Sure, yeah, we've learned.
This we have learned is going to begin to interpret the Josephine side of the dream. Right. Essentially, is what we're doing now.
Yeah. So now we're interpreting a dream that Joseph interpreted. Like we're deeply interpreting it now. So there are 7 heavens, and there are 7 palaces. They are 6, and they are 5. So I'll read it and we'll come back to it, I guess, and unpack it. All of them issue from the ancient holy supernal wine. That wine Jacob drew from afar, squeezing it from grapes of that, and rejoiced and drank. As it is written, he brought, lo, to him wine, and he drank, from Genesis 27:25. Here are included above and below. So scripture extends the word, stretching it out by 2 accents, namely the word lo. I'm not even going to try to do the cantillation mark. I don't know if you know how to do it, Zevi.
I got a surprise for you. Just wait a second.
Oh, wow, here we go. So it goes, namely lo to him below, and him above, embracing 2 aspects. So a couple of things going on here that are worth pointing out. So there are 7 heavens and 7 palaces. That's classic stuff from Talmud days and other things. That's like Merkava mysticism. In that sense, it's sort of old school Jewish mysticism that I think most people, at least Zohar people, would have been familiar with at some level. But that there are 6 and they are 5, right? So this is about how configurations of the Sephirotic tree, of the Sephirotic system, depending on how you valence it, there are more or less Sphirot. The most famous example of this, right, is if you don't count Keter, then you count Da'at. Like Das becomes one of the Sphirot, but Das is never a Sphirot if you count Keter as one, right? It's sort of a stand-in. So when people think of the 10 Sphirot, again, don't think 10, because it depends on how they're relating to each other, and depending on how you're relating to them, some of them drop in and drop out. Keter being the most famous because you can't Keter at some level because it's beyond all counting. Ditto, you can't count the first 3, because the first 3 are completely beyond any human understanding whatsoever, and therefore you only count the bottom 7, right? Mm-hmm. So really there are 7, right? And then there are 6, right? So 6 if you 6 if you don't count Shekhinah, right?
Malchut.
So, yeah, Malchut, if you don't count Malchut, because that's where we are. And then there are 5 if you collapse Malchut, and is it Malchut and Tiferet, or Malchut and
Tiferet and Yesod, Matt has it.
Right. Yeah, so if you combine the 2 that are the sort of Hyros Gamos, they become 1. So what's important to, again, people should realize when you think about the 10 Sphirot, it's really important not to think that there are 10. That there are 10 only if, all things being equal. But things are never equal in the divine drama of the Godhead, and therefore it always depends on how you think about it, how many there are. So that the cozy little image you've seen of like, and they're all lined up and everything's easy, that's like after the redemption's happened or something, right? In our world of divine drama and divine, all the hullabaloo that goes on in our world, they're never like that.
Yeah. They're super dynamic and dramatic, and they're changing and they're moving, and depending which side you look at them, you see a different face. It's like a very complex diamond that you can't count how many facets it has all at one moment.
Right. Exactly. So I think this is pointing us to be careful, right? How you count them, because again, how you count them. But they all issue from Adika Kadisha. They all issue from the ancient holy one, from Keter. and which is so. You want to pick up the section with the cantillation mark?
Yeah. So
I hear you're
yeah,
surprised. You may have it. You have a recording for us?
yeah, I do.
Yeah, great. Dude, look at this man. He's done his homework.
I prepared. Yeah. It's not me. You won't have to. I won't subject you to that. But I got a friend, and but there's things happening before we get there.
Right, you're right.
Which is that the wine that Jacob drew from afar. Jacob. So when the Kabbalists speak of the biblical primary characters, the patriarchs and matriarchs, they're referring. There's a dual reference happening. One is to the biblical character, and the other one is to the Sephirotic counterpart. And Jacob, of course, is Tiferet. So Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet. It's that center one that becomes united with Yesod. I mean, I don't know how. This is what it is. I mean, people may need a bit of background in this Sefirot for this episode.
Yeah.
I don't know how much explaining we can do on the spot. And then he brings the wine. The wine is that which flows down, as Justin said, from Keter. It's the divine overflow, the Shefa, as the Kabbalists call it, and he brings it to Isaac. Isaac is Gvura. Isaac is the divine severity. Jacob is divine Tiferet, which is balance or compassion, or depending on the context, means different things.
Right.
So we're reading. So this verse is when after Jacob steals the blessings from his brother Esau. He brings wine to his father Isaac. And also, if you read the text, you kind of skip over that. Like, he brought wine, like whatever, it's not a big deal in the text. But the Kabbalah's like, no, this is a big deal, because there's something else happening here, where there's a Sephirotic transference of divine energy, of wine, from Tiferet to Gvura.
Which is an odd flow.
Yeah. It's backwards.
It's backwards. Yeah, this is the thing that, again, people should, we think of them flowing one direction, but this is a case of retrograde flow.
Right. Yeah, and just to say a word here, so this is not all mumbo jumbo. We're talking here about the psychodrama. We're talking about the human drama and the drama of reality and the psyche of the different parts within ourselves, within the divine self, that are interacting and how they're influencing each other. And hopefully, if we get to peel back some of those layers, we'll see what's going on here in this divine psychodrama. But this last part, he brought him wine and he drank it. So in the basic story, Jacob brings Isaac wine, but there's this very strange cancellation mark, which is the mercha kfula, which is on the word loy, to him. Right, to him, to Isaac, and we don't. It's not a cancellation mark that appears very common in the biblical text. It's quite a rare one. There's like some ones that appear just in every second verse, and there's some that appear once in a book. And when we have such a strange cancellation mark, it's signaling us that there's something more going on here than meets the eye. And so firstly, our attention is drawn to this word him, which is also like not a very significant word seemingly in the text.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out. It's a very, like, of all the words to get an interesting cantillation mark. Right?
Yeah.
Folks, just to know, cantillation marks, what we mean here is the Torah is sung out loud when it's being read in the synagogue, and there are notes, there are symbols there's symbols that we use to note them. They're not obviously in the scroll, but there are all kinds of musical notation marks that exist above and below the Hebrew letters. And this one's really unusual. It's a double hold. And so it's a very strange one. And as Zevi pointed out, it's a strange cantillation mark on an otherwise completely boring word.
Right.
Like it's just it's just literally like a preposition with a personal suffix attached to it. It's a very boring word.
Right. You'd think it's a mistake that they put this cantillation on that word. And what the Zohar is doing here, which is really great, is that it's looking at the name of the cantillation itself, which is mercha kfula, which is a double mercha, and it's going to say that there's a doubling happening here, and that's what. So a friend of mine, I laned for my bar mitzvah, but I haven't really laned much since. But a friend of mine is one of the most beautiful Bali Kriya, one of the Torah readers that I've listened to hundreds, and I asked him to record the end of the verse for me, and I'll play that now so people can get a sense of what's happening here. Did that come through? Could you hear that? So it's a very, very beautiful cancellation, very, very elaborate, very, very ornate, and the lie here is saying which hymn, that there's two hymns going on here, that Jacob is bringing to Isaac, and Tiferet is bringing to Gvura, and that cantillation, the way that I kind of had this envisioning of it, that the sound itself is like tearing the text into two parallel realities, and we can see a divergent split into like there's the historical terrestrial story of a brother stealing blessings and bringing wine and getting his father drunk and all that stuff, and then there's this whole divine story of the Sefirot, and that word loy itself, that cantillation, is like that fracture point which breaks off the two, this dual narrative which we're going to see now emerge throughout the text.
Right. And again, the dual aspects, right, are going to be the supernal and terrestrial world.
Right. And that's what we start to see, the two visions, the dream that the butler had and the dream that Joseph read. We're going to see this duality now begin to play out.
I guess I'll do the next paragraph and then we can switch over.
Go for it.
All right. So now things get really strange. Enoch, Metatron, has said, so folks may know this, right, that in Kabbalistic lore, Enoch, one of the people in the Bible who never died, he's transformed into the very strange angel Metatron in the third book of Enoch, which I have an episode about if you want to check it out. So Enoch, Metatron, has said, he brought him wine, pouring water into that wine. So he brought him wine, which means he poured water into that wine. So folks may know that this is a really ancient custom reaching back to the Greco-Roman world, where no one ever drank wine straight. They thought it was too strong. They would always add some water to wine, which is funny because we don't do that anymore. Like it's they would think that's crazy.
Besides for the Kabbalists.
Yes, sorry for the Kabbalists. Yes. So if he had not poured in water, he could not tolerated it. The wine would have been too strong. So Enoch, Metatron spoke well, and this is why Scripture extends to Amma the intonation. So that's why they extend that to show that there's something else going on there. That wine flows from rung to rung, and all taste tamim until Joseph the Pious tastes it, namely the faithful beloved, as written, like fire, like fine wine flowing to my beloved smoothly. This is from Song of Songs. What is meant by fine wine? That Jacob came and poured water into it. This is the fine wine, just as Enoch Metatron said. So, to understand what's going on here is the image of adding water to wine is meant to make the wine palatable. And so that's the literal reading of what's happening. But the deeper Kabbalistic reading of this is that this is the flow into Gevurah, into judgment, and that if that judgment were pure and uncut, so to speak, it'd be terrible, and therefore some degree of chesed has to be poured into it, and that tempers the wine so that it can be drank, so that it can flow down to Tiferet.
Chesed being kindness.
Yeah. Loving kindness has to. It's like cutting adding some water to your whiskey. If you drink whiskey at barrel strength, it'd be a little too strong, so you bring it down to 40% or whatever to drink it. So that's sort of what's going on there in terms of this water into wine stuff. Not water into wine, but pouring water into wine. But also, I think it's just conspicuous that we have two like interesting children talking now, where we have the Yanuka talking, but Enoch Metatron in the literature is almost always referred to as the Na'ar, as the youth. And so this is like I like the idea that we're not only learning Torah from one child, we're learning it from two children. That and in many ways the Yanuka is allowing Enoch Metatron to speak through him And so now we're learning from two children, from the Yanuka, the suckling, and from the Na'ar, right? And it's also worth pointing out that Enoch Metatron is often represented as sort of the scholarch of the Heavenly Academy. He's like the chief rabbi of the Heavenly Academy. So so it's interesting that we have this Enoch Metatron now giving us a lesson about what's going on. I'll show to mention this in the chat. I see Jake Ehrlich, a good friend of ours and congregant and co-leader at a congregation Techia. So hey, Jake. Zevi, other thoughts?
This was so wild to me, and I had no idea what was happening the first time I read it.
Yes.
But what seems happening to me, similar to what you're saying, but I read it a little differently, is, well, so firstly, we just have this huge character just dropped in, no introduction, right? We have this conversation. We know all our characters. There's the child, his mom, the sages. We know all their names, and then boom, Enoch Metatron, like this deified, immortal character, with this other like demigod, just boom, like Enoch Metatron is said, and just there in the text.
Right.
And the way that I'm reading this is that we just did something in reading the way that the Kabbalist is reading the biblical text is not just explanatory, not just performative, but it's theological. They're affecting something in their reading. They're doing something. And him reading the fact that the biblical narrative was a split dual one, he split his own reality. He tore the text apart, and that tear continued right up into like this conversation of the Yanuka and the sages. And the Yanuka, as far as I can tell here, is transfigured into Enoch Metatron. Like there's an apotheosis of the Yanuka into Enoch, who's this human who's also transfigured into Metatron, right? So there's this dual character, Enoch Metatron, who's this human that becomes the divine, this half divine or lower divinity, right? The small Yud K Vav K, and who's also the Nar, as Justin, as you're saying. And it seems that the Yanuka has become him, and he's entered into the metaphysical right now, and it's Enoch Metatron, the Yanuka, speaking, and he's introduced with his dual name. Is that a reading that goes down for you?
Yeah. And it's interesting that it refers to him as Enoch Metatron,
right? Which is not typical.
Yeah, which is not typical. He's either one or the other.
Right? Exactly.
So it's interesting that because I don't think ever in the Talmud he's never referred to that way.
So I think that's the exact point here, right? The exact point here is that we're really like zeroing in on this dual reality that's present in all characters.
Right. And that's really true of the Yanuka, right? They always say of the Yanuka that he's a child, and then they're always like, oh, he's not a human being.
Right.
Like he's meant clearly to be the parallel of Enoch Metatron, that he's somehow a boy and somehow not a boy.
And we've been grappling with his identity the whole time, right? Is he human? Is he not human? And we're going to see in the next paragraph that's going to appear again, which I think, ironically, of all the comparisons to a Christological reading or to a New Testament comparison, this to me is the most standout, which is that one of the most typical questions that Jesus asks during his lifetime is, who do they say? Who am I? Who do you think that I am? Who do they say that I am? And it's the sense of while the Yanuka doesn't ask that explicitly, they're constantly trying to guess his identity. Who's your father? Who are you? Are you an angel? And here he just explodes into Enoch Metatron, and now we see who the Yanuka is in some sense.
Right, that next line, I guess I'll read it because it kind of wraps this section up before we start. Yeah, so Rabbi Elazar was amazed, and Rabbi Abba was amazed. And amazed is, I think, not a great translation. I think dumbfounded or something like that, like floored, is maybe the translation. And they said, "Surely this wine is yours." And this is great, right? Because this is a child. This wine is yours. Of course, it's not the wine that's on the table, right? The wine they're all looking at. It's not the wine at the end of the meal. Rather, it's the supernal wine.
It's the divine overflow. Yeah.
It's the shefa flowing down from. It's the sephirotic power flowing down through the sphirot. You have triumphed, right? This is the warlike language, right? Angel, messenger, mouth of the Holy Spirit. And so again, we get this language that he is, and I forgot to pull the Aramaic up. I wonder why it doubles. Angel, messenger. I wonder if it's malacha.
Oh. I mean, I'm curious to see what the Aramaic is, but I think it's a throwback to like 2 episodes ago when we had this whole discussion about the Shekhinah. Is she angel? Is she messenger? Is she God? Is she? And then we said that she's the mouth of God, right? She's the peh, the tno peh. So this angel, messenger, mouth of the Holy Spirit is like a direct continuation of what we were discussing. I think it was maybe 2 or 3.
Right. Yeah. So but maybe folks will remember this, is that she's an angel in some sense, and then she's going to be a messenger depending on how the flow is going inside of inside of the Sephirotic realm.
And then she's also a mouth, right, with the whole in the Tnufa section.
Right, and it's interesting here, right, that now the Yanuka is considered to be identical with the Shekhinah.
Right.
So his identity is just getting over-determined.
Yeah.
Is he a boy? Is he God? Is he the Holy Spirit? Is he this or that?
Right.
Like he becomes this incredibly over-determined young person. And again, that's what I think is interesting about young people, right? Deleuze famously said of Spinoza, we don't yet know what a body can do. And that's what's interesting, right? We think about the medieval mind. The medieval mind sees children as potentialities.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is interesting about the Yanuka. The Yanuka is all of these potentialities. And it's precisely because of his childness, their childness, right, that they can have all this divine potentiality. It's the adults who fossilized. We've quit growing at some level. We're stuck. But the Yanuka, because they're kind of a blank slate, right, the divine can flow through them, and their pure potentiality in terms of what they're capable of being. They can be all these things at once.
It's great. It would be very easy for me to say what you just said, but hearing that from a dad of real life children, that's a very beautiful thing to hear.
Yeah, and I love, again, I sometimes my kids will do something unusual, right? They'll do something I don't expect them to do, and I always quote that line from Spinoza: "We don't yet know what a body can do."
Yeah, it's also interesting here because I think there's a few ways to read that last line. One is an identification, which is on the head. The other is that it's not clear who they're addressing necessarily, or which aspect of the person who they're addressing. So they could be saying, surely this one is yours. They could be saying to the Yanuka, and you have triumphed. They could be speaking heavenward towards the Shekhinah. Or more likely, there's a motif that shows up amongst the rabbis in the Talmud and Chazal of the divine Shekhinah speaking through the throat of the human. Famously, Moses, who is Shekhinah medaberet mitoch grono, the Shekhinah, she speaks through his throat. So it's very possible that they're speaking to the child and then speaking to the Shekhinah, which is emanating from him. You have triumphed, almost like through him, speaking past him in some sense. And that's the mouth of the Holy Spirit. His mouth becomes the vehicle, becomes the merkava to the Shekhinah. That's a possibility. There's also one little point which is worth mentioning in the previous paragraph, which we ran over a little. That the wine that flows from rung to rung, the sferot, obviously, the ta'amim, which is another name for the cancellation marks. So that's another pun on play on words there. Until Joseph the Pious tastes it. Joseph the Pious, obviously representing the Sphera Yesod. So it comes down to the final Sphera, which is the divine phallic, which then gives its overflow, its shefa, its energy to Shekhinah, to the final Sphera Malchut. I mean, also, I have to say that, like, we could sit here and we could like pull out the puns and the innuendos for days, and we're just doing some of them, and those that appear to us, and more people that have spent more time, a lifetime with this text could just be continuing to pull out rabbits out of this magical hat, and I hope we're just giving it a very small taste of that.
Yep, just a tamim.
Yeah,
also, I like the fact that you said that Yesod is the final sphera, and then Malchut is the final sphera.
Did I say that?
Shows you like how you're counting, right?
Right.
And again, this is a point I really want to like drive home as much as I possibly can. You have to abandon, if you're going to study Kabbalah well, you got to give up. Like even though Daniel Matt puts the classic image of the 10 sferot at the very beginning of every volume, the first thing you need to do after you turn that page is forget that.
Right. Right.
Like
Right.
that's the like it's really good. It's on the first page to remind you who the characters are. But the moment that they should remind you, I wish he would just put them there without the connecting lines. As to show you, like, yeah, those are the characters you're dealing with, but do not think that they're locked into that,
Right.
Into those relations. And this is a case where I think that's exactly the case.
I mean, even that whole shape as well is only one out of many configurations of the Sefirot, right? That's Sefirot as they're known as Tikkun, but the Sefirot of Tow, the Sefirot of Yosher, of Igul, the Sefirot in a circle, in lines, and like in disarranged. It's only like even if you are going to be using 10, 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, still, like how are you configuring them is still very much open, and each sort of phase of reality or stage of the divine in their life is going to be a different configuration of the Sefirot, which is the same for our own emotions or our own internal Sefirot. They're never static and like, this is my response to the same thing. No, it's like, firstly, you're a child at one point, you're an adult, you're elder, and also within one day, there's like, we're constantly we're alive and we're moving, and so is God for the Kabbalists.
All right, someone cuts you off in traffic, and now Gevura is like,
yeah. All of a sudden, your whole Sephardic configuration has changed, and the wine's all over the place, and
Yeah, I think it's really, this is why, again, that's like really, I think, an important part. All right, well, if we're going to talk about so we've gotten one of the tendrils. Well, we have to get the rest, and we're now talking about the other one.
What was the first tendril that we got?
Shekhinah.
Okay. He replied, that vine is still waiting to yield fruit. And I'll just read the whole paragraph and we'll go back. On the vine that is known for its sanctity, for there is another vine called Alien Vine, a great band name for anyone that's looking. Yeah. Those grapes are not grapes, but hard, seizing the heart, biting like a dog. Those grapes are called a corrupt alien vine, Jeremiah 2:21. But of this vine it is written, on the vine, or rather on the vine, the well-known one, the one from which all holy ones tasted old wine, fine wine, wine that Jacob blended with water, so that all of those who know how to taste wine tasted it, and it was good for the palate. So the language here is just so exquisitely like rich, and the imagery that we're building here, and we're beginning to build very quickly. The Zohar will shift into a new like bundle and galaxy of metaphors, and begin playing with those. So let's try and unpack what we just said here. So firstly, this whole idea of the vine is still waiting to yield fruit. Yielding this motif of waiting to yield fruit obviously is something which has shown up a lot before with the nations Ammon and Moab, that they didn't yet bring their fruit and therefore they were protected, and that's a theme that's been, although before it was figs, right, and now it's vines, is that we switched across, but still that. And the main distinction that's being played out here in this paragraph is the difference between on the vine and the vine itself, which is going to be seen as the alien vine, which is interesting. The alien vine obviously is a reference to the Sitra Achra, to the mirror image of the divine reality, which is the demonic or the dark side of reality, and that's constantly mirror images to one another. Zeh Lomat Zeh Bar Lakim says the book of Ecclesiastes that reality is paralleled between good and evil, between dark and light. So this alien vine is going to, the same way that we have this vine, this story between the different Sefirot, between the different biblical characters, there's also going to be the alien side. The grapes are not grapes, seizing hard, biting like a dog. I'm curious, Justin, what you think is going on there. But then there is the vine. And in Hebrew, when we put a hey in front of a word, it becomes known as the hey hayidia, the known hey, which is Shekhinah. And the ones, all of the old holy ones tasted the old wine, this fine wine, the wine that's been mixed with water, that's been appropriate, that Jacob, that Tiferet blended, that all those that had to taste it know that it was good for the palate, which means, from what I'm gathering here, and I might need some help here, Justin, is that we can be approaching the same reality, the same grapes, the same vines, but unless we're approaching it right with the correct amount of Jacob, the correct amount of Chesed, water mixed in, you're either going to get one or another product. You're either going to get a sour batch of Sitra Achra, or you're going to get a sweet batch of Shechina. I'm going to turn to you, Justin, for some more elucidation there.
Yeah, I guess I would only have two things. Is that one, yeah, like you have to imagine all wines as blends, right? You're blending wine. You're mixing, different batches from different years and different times. And so, yeah, wine blending is a hugely important part of the winemaking process. And therefore, right, of course you have to blend them correctly. And I think this is a brilliant metaphor for the divine, right? That the divine also has to be blended correctly. And so I like that image of a blended wine. I also the language of hard, seizing the heart and biting like a dog. Grapes are not hard. They're like, it's like they're soft. The one thing that the Proverbs tells us, right, that wine makes the heart glad. Right, not seizing the heart. There's something about that imagery that's so terrifying. And also biting like a dog, right? You think of the dog as an unclean animal, and dog bites are very terrifying. You think of the ancient world. The image of the biting dog, rabies or something like that.
Yeah.
There's something, I think of the Sitra Achra as like, it's sort of like all of the aspects of God that are terrifying because God's kind of insane. Like part of what characterizes Sitra Achra, for me at least, is it's out of controlness. Is that it's like the divine world is a world seeking balance. It's not a balanced world, but it's a world seeking balance. The Sitra Achra, what makes it so terrifying to me is it's a world that is seeking imbalance. And we always had this saying back in growing up, is that the worst kind of dog is a dog that sometimes bites. The dog that never bites, you know what to do with that dog. And the dog that always bites, you know what to do with that dog. The dangerous dog is the one that sometimes bites. And that to me is Sitra Achra. God is not a God that always bites, and God is not a God that never bites. But there's something about God that sometimes bites, and that's awfully terrifying, and that's Sitra Achra. So that to me is like, when I get into those, like it's in those ways. It's like wine that seizes the heart, wine that sometimes is like bites, and it's hard. It's all the things that are worst things about, a drunk. If we want to be around a drunk, we want to be around a drunk who gets happy, who doesn't get hard, and who doesn't bite. But that's exactly what Sitra Achra is. It's the mean drunk.
Yeah, it's also there's something here which is interesting, which is grapes that are not grapes, which is like, is it grapes or is it not grapes? And it's like it looks like grapes, or it seems like grapes, but it's not actually grapes.
Right.
And there's a sense to play on something that came up in last episode. How real is Sitra Achra for the Kabbalists? How real is evil for the Kabbalists? So on the one hand, it's hard, seizing the heart, biting like a dog. It's almost like you bit into a stone instead of a grape, right? Like you were harvesting and you bit. That's gonna seize up and bite like a dog, right?
Yeah.
If you get that in your mouth. But it's also and therefore it's not even a grape, right? It was something else. It was like a pebble. So on the one hand, it's really real. Like taking a crunch on a stone is really going to be real, and it's gonna do you a number at the dentist. But it's also not. It's not grapes. Like you thought it was something and it wasn't. And I appreciate what you're saying, Justin, about the two sides of the divine, that seeking order or seeking unity, and that seeking chaos and seeking disunity. But there's also a sense, I think, where the Kabbalists are talking about reality itself, which is also built on the Sefirot, and there's a sense that in reality itself, there's the good wine, the well-mixed wine, and then there's the pebble, which you thought was a grape.
And this is the point of the Kabbalists. One of the images they use for Sitra Achra is the lees in winemaking. When you make wine, right, if you buy a bottle of good wine, almost always there'll be sediment at the bottom. Right? And that sediment will contain things that can hurt you. They can be rocks and all kinds of things. And so the idea of like that you can't make wine without making lees, and that God is the wine and Sitra Achra is the lees. So it looks like wine, it tastes like wine until you bite down, and then it's rocks.
Yeah,
but
and then
part of the winemaking process. There's no way to not make it.
Right, which I hear you saying that for the Kabbalists in God's creation of reality, there's no way for it not to emerge without the Sitra Achra, and that's well taken. It's also interesting the end of like so how do we deal with this divine chaos or this rocky reality that we bite into when it bites like a dog?
I think to continue the wine metaphor, right? I think it's about balancing out how you drink, right? The wine has to be blended, but also don't drink to the dregs.
Right.
There's a lesson there, like at the bottom of every bottle is Sitra Achra. Don't go that far, like.
And I mean, and quite, I think there's an explicit point being made here at the end, which is that you have to blend it with water. You have to like bring in kindness, loving kindness. Like you can't just see reality or God through the lenses of justice and severity and right and wrong. Like imagine trying to build a relationship entirely on the principle of justness, of justice, of what's right and wrong. It wouldn't last very long, right? Which is what the Medrash says, that God wanted to create the world through Midas Hadin, through Gvura, through justice, and Rosh Enim Skaim, it wouldn't last, and he had to Olam Chesed Yabani, he had to build a world with Chesed, which is what the Kabbalists are saying here, that you can't just have a wine of straight wine. You need Chesed, you need kindness, and this is true in our relationships. This is true in the way that we look at the world around us. And then the last line here is that all those who know how to taste wine tasted it, for it was good for the palate. You have to know how to taste it. Like it takes time, and this is still the child speaking, right? This child who's now metamorphosized into something much greater is telling us about how to that it's good for the palate, but and like have that trust and faith that it's good, but you have to learn how to taste it. Like it takes time. There's more years than this child has been alive that he's speaking now, right? You have to learn how to taste the wine.
But he knows how to drink the supernal wine. He may not know how to drink the actual wine. And I do like the idea too that the divine or the world is an acquired taste. Right? Like, it's wine. If you just drink red wine, if you have, if you're an 8-year-old or whatever, hand them red wine, they may think it's bitter and be like, that's disgusting. But like, or whatever. But it's an acquired taste. And so you do have to appreciate it, but it may not be the best taste at first. And of course, anyone who's lived in the real world for any length of time, reality is an acquired taste.
Yeah.
And and our job, right, is never to become so drunk that we escape it, nor should we totally abstain either. And again, we should push this. Of course, folks have substance abuse issues and stuff like that. But I think the idea is that the goodness and the badness of the world, you need to develop you have to become a sommelier of reality.
Yeah.
Taste the goodness and the badness, because the bitterness of a wine helps to balance the sweetness. And that's sort of what the Kabbalists do, right? They're sommeliers of the wine of reality, the divine wine. And maybe that wine, of course, that the Yanuka has tasted and knows very well, even though he hasn't, maybe he's not done so great with the wine on the table yet.
Yeah, that's very beautifully said. And I think there's a point here which speaks to that earlier, which is they said, surely this wine is yours.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a way of reading that, which is surely this wine is yours. This wine, which is now being mixed with water and fine old wine and being learned how to taste and good for the palate. It's like there's two wines here, right? There's or there's and it's this wine is yours. And there's a deep
two wines here.
Yeah, at least correct. And there's a deep sense of appreciation for the Yanuka. Of this sense of maturity beyond his own years, and they're no longer standing before Yanuka. They're standing now before an angelic, demi-logical mouth of the Holy Spirit. Right? This is an utter transformation.
And to that point, Zevi, I love how that the section with Rebbe Elazar and Rebbe Abba are amazed and they like praise him, and he doesn't skip a beat. It's like he's in a trance.
Yeah.
He's just like the Shekhinah, the Magid is just speaking through him. The words are just falling out of him at some level. And there's this moment where they again, they offer him this praise, and it just says he replied.
Right.
He's not even hearing them at some level.
Right.
It's just the shefa, the overflow is just pouring out of him. So I love the image where he's not really even interacting with them anymore at some level. He's kind of in a static state, perhaps.
Yeah. Well said. I think as well, like it's very clear that his whole attitude and tonality is shifted, right? Because if we look at previous compliments, the way he responds is with a slapback, with a this,
Right.
with some chutzpah. And here it's I mean, we're seeing a developing character. And that's certainly true. And there's also a point where his response, the first thing he says is that vine is still waiting to yield fruit. That vine being two things now, because everything's doubled, right?
Right.
One is
Doubled.
the divine wine, which he still has to explain. Like the wine is still going to go on to produce the vine on the vine, which is Shechina, but it's also his drush is still waiting to yield fruit, right? He's created this vine for us that he's pulled out of the biblical dream imagery, and that vine is still waiting to yield fruit, and that fruit that's waiting to yield is the conclusion of his drush of the two wines. And part of the way that I read is part of why he doesn't respond to their adulation or to their amazement or to their compliments is, as you're saying, because he's still on a move here, and he's still yielding fruit, and that's it's cosmic for him. He has to get to the end of that drush.
Right.
And
this is tachash. It's new wine. It's not.
Right.
It's still fermenting in him, so to speak. So don't drink the wine till it's done. And he's like, I'm not done yet.
Exactly. I'm not done yet. Like don't break my my drift. Like I'm onto something here. Give me like I love it.
Yeah. Zevi, will you?
Sure. And I think we can resonate with this. Like there's so many times where we get caught in the flow of an idea or in a piece of music or a dance, and it's like that thing needs to come through you. And like the worst thing someone could do at that point would be like, even if it's to praise you, it's like no, that's not the time for it. It's like this thing has to happen. Okay. When that vine reaches her, her capital H, Shechina, the divine feminine, that which is the divine that's manifest in our reality, it puts forth three tendrils, which are three images of the patriarchs by whom she, Shechina, is sanctified. The three images of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which in the dual narrative here is going to be a reference to the first three emotive sirot, which is where we started counting when we count from 7, which is chesed, loving kindness, gvura, severity and judgment, and tiferet, balance and compassion. I never know how to translate tiferet.
Yeah, it's hard. Balance is sometimes how it gets translated.
Yeah.
That's not or beauty.
Beauty is the least helpful translation.
Yeah, I think it's the least helpful, but you always see it translated that way. But I think balance is really the
I mean, you can only really translate it in the context of chesed and gvura. It's balance between chesed and gvura. So it puts forth three tendrils. So the vine, the Shechina, there's this divine energy like a sap flowing through the vine, and that sprouts out into three tendrils, which is the three sfirot, which spring off the divine sap, the divine wine, the shefa. There's no sanctification except by wine, and there is no blessing except by wine wherever joy prevails. So pointing here to the centrality of wine in this dual narrative, wine down here in our reality, according to classic Judaism, the Talmud and rabbinic sources, ein simcha ela b'yayin, there's no joy except through wine. The sense that there's a real need to embrace, as you're saying, to savor reality and to find joy in that. And of course, when we say there's no joy except through wine, and when we said that the wine means Shechina, there's no joy unless we have the divine presence with us. Wherever joy prevails, wherever there's joy, wherever there's happiness, that is where the wine is. That is where the Shechina is. And it's flowing through the spherotic process of chesed, gvura, tiferet.
Right, and again, the joy isn't joy undiluted, or it isn't pure wine, right? It always is, at least in the Kabbalistic idea, diluted. And so again, I like the idea that joy is never just joy. It's always like there's also some hurt in there too. There's some gevura in there. So it can be joy, but still, it's not Pollyannish. the Kabbalists are many things, but one thing they're not is like seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. The world to them is a very it's a very complex thing. Also, just like the idea of wine as being a thing that has undergone a transformation, right? Like, you start off with grape juice and it does something and it becomes something else. And there's something, medieval people, ancient people had no idea how that happened. Now we've demystified it. Now we know it's, Saccharomyces that does it. But wine only becomes wine through a kind of transformation itself. And I love the idea that that to transform something from regular to sacred, right? There's no sanctification except through wine, is only possible because it has undergone itself also a transformation. That the medieval wine must have been really, relatively magical. You hear stories of vintners having sort of magic sticks, right? That they had to stir and of course they didn't know, but they, the yeast are sticking to those sticks, and that kind of transformation has a very magical power. So no transformation except for by something that's also been transformed.
Yeah, I have to say that that even with all of the modern understanding, it's still miraculous and wondrous for me.
Oh, and to me, even as a person who is a brewer, people often say things like, we first became human at some level when we discovered fire. But I love that Claude Levi-Strauss said, no. It was brewing that made us who we are. It was the ability to control not fire, but decomposition. That was really the moment where he thinks that is as the sort of big moment. And I love the idea that fermentation is really is a breakthrough moment. Fire is sort of an afterthought.
It's literally culture.
Mm-hmm. No, that's right.
It's also quite exquisite here how the Zohar doesn't have to shift this way, but it shifts to joy. It's this unexpected joy. Like if you're reading the text, it's not necessarily what's coming. We're dealing with Sitra Achra and Shechina and Sfirat, and then boom, wine, joy, and that association, of course, is there. And then when the Yanuka, when the child Enoch, Metatron, Shechina pulls that out for us, we're like, oh yeah, and we remember that rabbinic, famous passage of there's no joy without wine, and it injects something into this wine here. It's almost like this. It's become bubbly. It's become carbonated. There's now a joy, a lightness in this narrative, which was for me, caught me delightfully by surprise.
Yeah, it's like you come up above the clouds, and all of a sudden it's all blue. And then now, we get above the clouds, and now we're almost, in just a moment, right? We get this brief moment of kind of a break in the clouds.
Yeah.
And then back in a minute, we're back into the war stuff.
Yeah.
One daf later,
It's also like, what are they after at the end of the day, right? And the Kabbalists are after a lot, and it's a whole, you could write many PhDs on what they're after, but they're after joy. Like it's very, very central to them that there's no practicing a Jewish sacred life without happiness, without simcha, and that's like a really, really central pillar. It's like really, really it's like a central mitzvah, as the rabbis put it. And
but a very mature kind of joy, right? Not a joy that's sort of like get drunk and be, forget about your problems, or just pretend that the world's fine and nothing's the matter. It's a joy that's arrived at through a very it's a joy that's derivative of balance.
Yeah. And it's a joy that's emerging from within the battle as well, right? We although it's an oasis, it's a bit of like an eye of the storm here, but there's still locked horns. They haven't unlocked horns just yet, right?
No, right. Yeah, it's right. It's a hard fought joy.
Yeah. As is wine. Wine, fermentation. It's there's planting and watering and tending, and at any point it could go wrong. At any point you could munch on a stone instead of a grape.
No, for sure. The Shekhinah the Sitra Achra is always waiting at the bottom of the bottle. So be careful.
Correct.
Be careful. Should I pick up?
Please.
So we return back to the first verb, right? As she was budding. So we're going to pick up those three verbs that we introduced about what the vine does. So as she was budding, like a bride adorning herself, entering in the joyous passion of that wine blended with water, then up came her blossom. Again, the second verb. Her love ascends toward her beloved, and she begins to sing, entering in love. Then those tender grapes become full and ripen, filling that with fine old wine. So when one blesses over wine and reaches for the land, he must pour water into wine, since one should recite the blessing, have compassion over Israel, your people, with water and wine. Otherwise, who can tolerate it? This was to inform Joseph, since the matter depended upon him. Yeah, this is really this is one of the more beautiful sections that I think we've covered so far. That you get this beautiful image of Shekhinah, like the divine bride, becoming adored in this moment of the Hyros Gamos. That as she's traveling down the spherotic structure, she's becoming more and more adorned as a bride. She's budding, and you get the idea of like. I don't know. I got the idea. The imagery that came to me was almost like a bride, just like putting on, like her, the kala putting on the dress and the jewelry and the, all the things, right? So it's interesting that I love the idea that Shekhinah, at some level, as she travels down the spherotic structure, we tend to think of that as like a diminution of glory. But I love the fact that she becomes more glorified. As she travels down, travels down toward Yesod, and so I love that image of there's an increase in beauty. So it struck me as the opposite of Ishtar's descent into the underworld, where she's becoming increasingly undressed and like stripped naked. This is the opposite. As the Shekhinah descends, she buds up, as opposed to becoming diminished. Zevi?
This is like a totally static paragraph for me. It's like this. The imagery is as the vine is blossoming and blooming, and the imagery is blossoming and blooming, and I like it's really quite exquisite, this whole thing. And I loved Justin, what you're saying about the descent. And it's also coupled with an ascent, right? Her love ascends towards her beloved, so she goes down and love comes up. And for the Kabbalists, the ascending love of Shekhinah to Kutchebricha, of the divine feminine to the divine masculine, is a very central motif. It's the two waters, the upper and lower waters, and they attract each other and they draw each other the same way that their imagery of how in nature rainfall causes precipitation, which causes rainfall. It's this dance of the cosmos, the divine cosmos itself. That's the waters above, right? The Hebrew word heaven, shamayim, is water there. The upper waters, the lower waters, and this dance, hugely rich motif with a lot of implications, and being read by Hasidic masters in a very radical feminist direction at times. The ascent of Malchut back to Keter, based on a verse based on a biblical prophecy of the woman being raised up at the end of days, the woman being read as the divine woman. So her love ascending towards a beloved is a messianic. It's redemptive. It's the end of days. It's eschatological. Which it's just incredible how much the Kabbalists do in so few words. It's just like and when you're able to enter that stream, it's like you just see the music. So that's one thing which is happening here, and she begins to sing. There's like jubilation. She enters in love. Like what a great expression. And she becomes the grapes become full and ripened, which I think is referencing what is it, chapter 7 or chapter 8 of Song of Songs, where there's two women that are being contrasted. One of them who her breasts are full, and the other one who has not yet reached maturity. And I think that's which the Kabbalists read there as the two stages of the divine feminine, filling up with fine old wine, which is a great double play as well, because you fill up on wine by drinking wine and you become intoxicated, and that can sometimes be involved in love. And then there's a sense that she is filled with the divine energy she's being filled with, and like her body is swelling. She's becoming voluptuous with this divine energy. There's just so much going on here at once. It's like we need an artist here. We don't need we don't need theologians anymore.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you can't quite tell, is she the wine or is she drinking the wine?
Right.
again, it becomes this Ouroboros kind of imagery,
Yes,
right?
yes,
It's
yes,
the Shekhinah, the
yes,
wine that is the Shekhinah drinking the wine that is divine. You get
yes.
this again, this sort of feedback loop of how the divine becomes drunk on itself.
And she's divine as well, right?
Yeah, no, right, exactly. So yeah, I love the image of you can't quite tell what's drinking what anymore. The topsy turvy world of divine intoxication.
Which is very on point for the Kabbalists when they're speaking of Shekhinah, right? Shekhinah is like, firstly, when they speak of Shekhinah, there's times throughout the Zohar where it says she is Shekhinah, she is Malchut, she is like, it will just go through all of the labels that she is, and then it will say like where is Shekhinah? So, well, she is the rivers, she's the mountains, she's the forest, she's so it's this, and that's certainly so she is the wine, she's the vine, she's the drinking, she's the drunk, she's the knower knowing itself, she's the self-loving lover. It's like very much on brand here for them.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a whole second half of this paragraph,
right?
Which is that when one blesses over wine and reaches for the land, they must pour in water, since one should recite the blessing, have compassion over Israel people with water and wine, otherwise who can tolerate it? Which still needs some unpacking here. So there are three primary blessings that practicing Jews say after they consume food or drink. There's the shortest one, which is typically said when one drinks water or something that shares the same blessing for water. Then there's the long one, which is for a meal or bread, which typically go together in the rabbinic mind. And then there's the medium blessing, which is known as the al-hamichya, which is said over a few things, special things, and wine is one of them. And it's a strange blessing. Like there's a lot of things that are thrown into there that aren't clearly attached to the act of eating, right? We begin to talk about the altar and the land of Israel. Like there's a lot of things that get tied into there. So in that blessing, there's a phrase which is al haaretz, for the land, that we're praising for the land. And what he's saying here is that and I mean the whole theme of the grace after meals has been throughout, right? And the drama of that. Remember, we had the Yanuka whose hands were shaking because he reached a certain word and then he stopped shaking. So this is all, and he's giving instruction here. He's teaching them that when one reaches for the land, he must pour in water, which is something that Kabbalists do. We mentioned before, Kabbalists do these, like this is practice that becomes law, this becomes halacha in some sense. And why do we pour it in? Land obviously represents another image for Shekhinah, right? Land is the body of reality. The body is the feminine for the Kabbalists, the soul is the masculine. So when we reach for the land, when we reach the Shekhinah in the blessing, we pour in water because we're about to say to have compassion over Israel people. Rachim na al Yisrael amecha. And compassion takes the mixing of water with wine, of chesed with gvura. So we're doing this again. We're doing this performative theological enactment this activity. Otherwise, who can tolerate it? Like who can take a straight cup of gvura to the face? And we're begging. We're saying rachim na, like have compassion, and we're causing that compassion. We're doing the compassion. And then this last line is my favorite. This was to inform Joseph, since the matter depended on him, right? Which is like these two great things going on here. That on the one hand, like he's saying that the Joseph in Egypt who heard the message, like the inner Joseph was hearing the message of the cup era because he had to do all of this. Like this whole thing that we just explained is what Joseph got and had to know. And for the Kabbalists, it's very clear. Like the same way that the rabbis, Chazal, read the biblical characters as rabbis, right? King David is sitting and studying Torah all day. Like philosophers read everyone as philosophers. The rabbis for the Kabbalists, everyone's a Kabbalist, right? So for the Yanuka, Yosef is a Kabbalist who hears the message and of course understands what he's hearing. And the matter depended on him, which means also that the upper Yosef, that Yesod, who's Yosef, the divine intimacy or bonding or embrace or the phallic, it depends on him. It's masculine, so him to be aware of all this, to allow the wine to come into Malchut, so she can absorb and drink and return back to him in song and love and ripe and fullness. And this is all just in two words of the verse, right? Up came her blossoming, like boom. From that is like this whole explosion of like an entire cosmos.
No, right, yeah, and really like the whole Hyros Gamos, the whole cosmos, like the again, you can. It's like a fractal. The more you zoom in, the more it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Zooming in doesn't lessen it at all.
Right.
Also, I wonder if that last line was a little bit of shade too on the right, like
how.
Like that, the whole matter depended on Joseph, right? And of course you read it as Yesod, but like Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Abba are sitting there in awe, and you get the sense that maybe he's coming out of his reverie a little bit and said, "Yeah, it depends on Joseph, not y'all." I don't know. Maybe not. I don't know.
I get a sense that he is being a little cheeky here by saying like this was all so obvious to Joseph and me, but not you guys. That's
yeah, I get that too. I get a little bit of that as well. Although we go right back to Enoch Metatron talking again with this really complex pun. You want me to pick up?
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing here, which is that a point which we've mentioned before and worth mentioning again for the Kabbalists, this is not theory, and this is not disembodied. It's very much embodied and put in practice, and this 3/4 of the way through this whole thing of pouring the wine when we're blessing is like, how do we enact these things? How do we create an ecology of practices, to borrow a term from my friend John Vervaeke? How do we take these very, very esoteric, abstract ideas and bring them into our daily lives? It's by doing these acts, these signposts of halakha, of Jewish practice, which then open the possibility for this imagery and these ideas to flow back to us. So it's not just philosophers talking about angels on the head of a pin, but it's like how do we, part of this is how do we practice this? And he gives them a practice. He's like, when you're blessing, and you can make a blessing in the wine at least once a week, right? Do this, and when you do this, you're going to remember everything I just told you, or at least part of it. And that embodiment of the Kabbalist, it's very grounded, and it's when you reach the land, it's very embodied, very grounded, very earthed, and that's something which I think is really exquisite about Jewish mysticism, which is worth mentioning.
And I wonder, in the Middle Ages, I wonder when the old Roman idea of putting water into wine had ended. I wonder if that, like, obviously when you read the Talmud, it's still there because they're living in basically, the mission, and they're still living in the Roman period.
Yeah.
And I wonder if by the Middle Ages that custom had ended, because no one, aside from Kabbalists, no one's drinking wine with water in it anymore.
Right.
It was common in the ancient world, but I wonder had that ended by the Middle Ages. I know that wine, there are cases where when they're blending wine, they'll add water, but no one at the table typically is adding water anymore. I wonder if that's an instance where the Kabbalists are reintroducing
the
old custom,
right,
or if that's a custom that had fallen out by then, or.
Yeah, I feel like, Justin, you would know a lot more about the history of wine than I would, but there is a possibility where it is sort of this vestigial practice, and they're repossessing it, or they're reclaiming it, which is not uncommon for the Kabbalists to do, both from within the domain of Jewish practices to re-adopt them and re-imbue them with meaning, or even external practices that wouldn't be too uncommon.
Right. And Spanish people and Portuguese people add Coke to wine. Like Coca-Cola.
Coca-Cola. Really?
Yeah, Coca-Cola. I've seen, it's like a thing. It sounds absolutely abominable to me, but I was like, I forget what it's called, Pichu or something like that. But I was in the Basque Country. Maybe it's a Basque thing. I was in the Basque Country once, and like someone ordered it next to me, and I was like, that looks absolutely foul. But it's amazing what cultures get up to. I wonder what the Kabbalistic meaning of adding Coca-Cola to wine is.
You know what's worse? There's a certain point, and I don't know if this is like just Jews or just Ashkenazim or just like white people. I don't know who this demographic is, but there's a certain age where you begin to dip your bread, your challah, into wine. That is a whole new level of gross.
Yeah, it does not taste good. Yeah, I get the symbolic ish of that, but it is not. Yeah.
You get soggy challah in your wine, and then you get bready wine.
Yeah,
count me out of that.
The Kabbalist, that's gross.
No, but jokes aside, I mean, all of these mixing of foods and bread and salt and water, like these all mean a lot to the Kabbalists, and they're doing it all the time. It's a big deal for them.
Yep. I guess maybe we should go. We should finish this section up before we get back into the Moab stuff. Maybe we should. That's a natural break, I think. Does that make sense to you to go to the end of 278?
Yeah.
All right, so let's go there. Am I reading or are you reading? Whose turn?
I can continue a little.
Okay.
Actually, I don't. Who? Do you want to read, Justin?
Yeah, I'll read.
Go for it.
Yep. So we're back to Enoch Metatron speaking again. Enoch Metatron said, 3 tendrils, surely corresponding to the 3 patriarchs. So we've already settled that. But she has 4. But wait, there's more. Right? Well, this is what's written, right? So Vayechi Forachat, right? So she was budding. There's a pun when she rises, right? Unferachas, and flies. So there's a pun between budding and flying, right? The same shoresh can mean both things. So the same root can mean both things. So when she flies, soaring with her wings, then up come her blossoms. That 4th one remaining who rises with her, not parting from her, as it's written, he rode upon a cherub and flew. When he flies, Cheforachat, from the Porachat, she flies. Enoch Metatron spoke well, and so it is. So they're developing a really elaborate. He's using a very elaborate pun on the word to bud and to fly. And so obviously when the Kabbalists are seeing the same shoresh being used in a different context, they must be connected because they're linguistically connected. You folks remember our conversation last time that the language is metaphysics for the Kabbalists. Like ipso facto, there is no distinction to be made between language and metaphysics. If there's a linguistic difference, there's a metaphysical difference, or if there's a connection, there's a connection. There's a connection here in the root of this word between budding and flying. And so if there's a connection, that must mean that there is a 4th element, right? So we have the 3 patriarchs, and so there must be a 4th element here. And so the 4th element is Yesod, right? The 4th element, of course, is going to be Yesod, and that's what Shekhinah unites with in the Hyros Gamos. So again, it depends on how you count, right? Because how many Sefirot are there? It depends, right? Are Malchut and Yesod in the Hyros Gamos? Then if they are, they're one thing, and that would be another combination that we'll want to add to the 3 based on this pun. Anything else in there, Zevi?
This is very sexual. I hope we don't get demonetized, Justin.
Yeah, I love the idea of she's riding him, right? The language, right? Definitely it's riding language. She's riding upon. He rode upon a cherub and flew. I do love the idea of that she's riding on him, right? And that's exactly the sin that Lilith was punished for. Is she wanted to be on top, right? But here we actually have Shekhinah on top, so to speak. So I like the image. Like it's an interesting, and again, I think that the Kabbalistic reading of that is Lilith wanted to be on top for bad reasons, right? She wanted to dominate,
right?
Whereas here it's like it's a different kind of relationship, and therefore it's a more balanced relationship as opposed to Lilith who wanted to dominate Adam. Here it's part of a balancing as opposed to an act of domination. At least the fans of Lilith will read that differently, but I think this is the way the Kabbalists are certainly reading it. That it's a balancing act as opposed to a domination act.
Or there's space in that relationship for them to be in that way with each other.
Yeah, because it's funny because it's not clear where the relationship of Yesod and Shekhinah are. If Shekhinah is from Malchut, then she's coming from the bottom. She's on the bottom going up.
Typically.
Right. But if she's flowing down,
right,
and she's flowing down, and in this case, she's flowing down onto Yesod, and she's on top.
Right.
So it all depends. Depends on how she's moving, and again, on what kind of depending on what kind of sexual relation. It depends on what the Hyros Gamos looks like.
Yeah, there's a few other interesting things going on here. One is this relationship between flying and budding. So the shorish, the Hebrew source word is peresh ches perach or parach, and perach means a flower, right? It's the flower that buds, and the froach is to fly, to flee, to soar, and that's very beautiful to tie in those two images together of the flower and the flying, and there are many plants that flower by flying, right? That's a form of their what's the term for it? The way that they like how plants do their thing. You know what I'm talking about? And so that's really nice that they come together linguistically and ecologically in like out in nature, in reality. And there's also a sense to be modest here with the language, but there's a sense of in the arousal of the feminine, the Shekhinah. There's also a sense of she's a flower that's blooming and blossoming and opening, and then the flying, right? So he flies, she flies. They both fly with each other, like they're kind of getting off on each other and ascending with each other, which is what the Shekhinah and Kodesh Baruch Hu do. Like when they unite, they're both able to ascend together, and when they're down, they're both down together. And there's that. It's very. It's like it's quite tender. It's quite intimate. Well, and we're talking here about God. Like this is what. So it's quite something. And then we bring in the cherubs, and I think we picked. So it's this verse from 2 Samuel 22:11, and it's not just by chance, but it's because we spoke about the cherubs earlier, right? We spoke about. A while earlier, we spoke about the cherubs as the two angels that the Shekhinah descends upon, right? In the whole discussion of Shekhinah as a messenger or angel. What did we say the two cherubs were? Do you remember, Justin? I can't remember now what it was.
Which sphere? Which?
Yeah. Which sphere?
I mean, they must. No, because I guess it was Chod and Netzach because it was the lowest two before you get to Malchut, but I think it wasn't. I think that I forget which ones they were.
Oh, we could flip back, but I don't know if we'll find it that quickly. But the connection is there, and those that in their own time will flick back. There'll be some fun homework for them to see the intertextuality here. Yeah, and this whole idea of her wings. There, we mentioned. I don't remember if you mentioned this earlier or later. Like if we're gonna still mention this, it's either my own exhaustion or something, but I've been sucked into the atemporality of the text itself. But we're gonna speak about how there's this sense where we spoke about how there's no space for the wings of the Shekhinah. There's no room for her to open her wings. And here she can blossom. She opens her wings, and there's a sense that she is this flower, and the petals are her wings that she opens, with which she rises up on Yesod to the divine, to Tiferet, and has this divine sexual cosmic reunion. Enech Metatron spoke well, and so it was means, from what I can tell, he spoke it, and so it was. Like he spoke it. And he said it, and it happened because he said it, right? This is enacted. This is performative. He said it, and so it was because he spoke well. He made Shekhinah reunite with Kodesh Baruch Hu. What does that mean? That means so much. That means that he reunited the divine with these words, which is what famous line from the Ramak, from Moses Kadavera, the point of the Zohar, what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was trying to achieve with this chibur, with this compilation, with this union, was to unite Kodesh Baruch Hu and Shekhinah. And that's what's happening here, and also on all the levels of reality that speaks to. He's and so it was in himself, in those listening, in us listening, this capacity for us to reunite our anima and animus. This is the story of the Zohar writ large.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, and it's also conspicuous who's saying it, right? Like Enoch Metatron is referred
Mm.
often as the Yodke Vovke Katan. Like this is not just anyone speaking. This is like in the Kabbalistic mind, this being is a being of, tremendous power. In some sense, second only in some sense to, to Keter, like to the utter transcendent. So it's not it's
Yeah.
conspicuous who is making it so. Um, Yeah, and also I get the idea, right, that if you're talking in infinites, what's up and down, what's
Hmm.
top and bottom, you can sort of like tumbling in the void, you don't know who's on top.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that tumbling in the void, the divine, it doesn't have to worry at some level about these kind of negotiating power relations.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because when it's just sort of a sort of seething magma of divinity.
Right.
Pulsating and moving, and therefore we have to impose upon it these ups and downs and lefts and rights. But that's an imposition of our own weak mind as opposed to the power of the divine. But yeah, I think you're right. That's these sections. This is why I think the Yanuka is a great part of the Zohar to read, because in some level you get the kind of Zohar and you get a bite-sized chunk of the Zohar. Right? Because these themes are going to be repeated through the Zohar constantly.
Yeah.
But at some level, you get a digestible chunk. Not easy. You have to earn it, right? But you get the whole picture at some level from the Yanuka, which again makes him all the more incredible. Which is interesting because really we could end here. I mean, this is the Zohar, like you said. This is Zohar writ large, or writ small, actually.
Right.
Maybe. But no, the Yanuka is far from done.
Right.
Do you want me to close it out, or do you want to close
Mine. I gotta tell you, Justin, between however many hours of sleep I got last night and the exquisiteness of this text, I'm feeling drunk right now. The wine is getting to me. I gotta say,
the wine is getting to you,
and I'm all for it.
All right, let's read this last part, and then we'll comment on it. And it's late enough in the day that you can go have a glass of wine. I have to drive back to Detroit to have wine later tonight. So all the companions, all the Chavraya, came and kissed him. I love that it's not just Rabbi Abba. Like you get a sense that like they've all kind of entered the chat.
Yeah.
Right. That now we have all the Chavraya, all the companions came and kissed him. Rabbi Elazar said, "Blessed is the compassionate one who sent me here." And it's interesting, right? Again, who's doing what? Blessed the compassionate that sent him. But remember, it was Rabbi Elazar who decided to go.
Right.
Like,
right.
Who's the KBH in this? Like again, the line between Rabbi Elazar and the divine, it's not clear who sent who.
Do people know what you mean when you say KBH?
The Kash Baruch Hu, like the Blessed Holy One. I like saying KBH because it could be Kadosh Baruch He, but also it could be Kadosh Baruch Hu. Like I like the fact that in the English we can do both genders at once. I guess I could say this, but it doesn't have the same ring in Hebrew, I suppose.
The HKBH. It reminds me of who's that? The technology YouTuber MKBD.
Yeah.
No, you use it very fluently, and I'm like, does anyone know?
Yeah, I think maybe it's unique. I think it's because of Alana and I will, that's our slang for Hashem. But
it's fun. I like that Matt capitalizes companions. Capitalization in modern context means the divine, basically, right? That's when we capitalize things, and they're deified in his own deification, in some sense here. Blessed is the compassionate one who sent me here. It's like he's not even. I mean, he's changed up his tactic. He's not even praising the child anymore.
Right.
He's just like, blessed is God who sent me here. Like thank God that I got the chance to come and witness this Heros Gamos, this divine reunion. And God has many names in Judaism, and it's the compassionate one. It's the merciful.
Right, and it's picking up on the blessing from the wine, right? Like I think he's
right.
He's riffing on that
right.
On that blessing.
Right.
because the wine's still sitting in front of them. They haven't yet actually drank the wine, right? Like there's so much wine talk in the air, but the actual glass of wine is still sitting before them. So I love, again, trying to keep the image in mind.
What a day.
What a day. So the child said, companions. I love how now he finally addressed them as chavraya.
Wow.
I think this is the first time.
Wow. If that's true, that's big.
I could be wrong here, but I think this is the first time where
You might be right.
He's called them companions. And if that's true, that's a real breakthrough in their relationship.
But they've all transcended. They've all transcended. It's like they're no longer the humans that met each other. They're now these celestial gods that are talking to each other. They're chavraya, you know?
Yeah, they really have. So bread and wine are the essence of the table. All the rest of the food is subsidiary to them. I'll keep reading them. We'll come back. Look, the Torah has gained them, and they belong to her. Now Torah implores you lovingly, saying, come eat of my bread, drink of my wine. I have mingled. Since Torah is inviting you and begging you to do this, you should fulfill her words. Please, since she is inviting you, do her wish. And they said, certainly so. They sat and ate, rejoicing with him. And after they had eaten, they had lingered at the table. So,
slow clap.
Yep. So there's a couple of things I guess I'll mention, and we can mine out some things. I love how the Yanuka is speaking for God, speaking for Torah. Like he can say, no, I'm telling you, the Torah has told me to tell you this, right? Come eat of my. And also, again, there's another marriage here, right? That there's the divine marriage, the Hieros Gamos that's been going on, but also finally the meal at some level is really complete. We spent so much time on Teruma, like Tanufa, on bread, and then this session we spent a lot of time on wine, and finally now it's a meal, right? Now it's a meal.
Yeah, it's come together. Yeah,
it's really come together. Like it's and he says, right, that food that the meal is bread and wine, everything else is subsidiary.
Yeah.
And now finally we have a meal. Like we have the meal of Torah. And I love the idea also, right? Remember the whole thing about the first session, or it wasn't the first session. One of the sessions about how when we're invited.
Yes, very good.
Torah is now inviting us.
Yes.
So that is an additional layer of the onion peeling back. That we now that the wine invited us to give a blessing, but now the Torah itself is inviting us. So we've now entered even to a deeper level of Raza de Torah.
I'm seeing something really, really wild happening here. And it's also casual. It's just like here, black letters on a white page, but it's really tremendous. It comes together. They get their bread and wine, right? But Torah has gained them. They've been like transubstantiated into the food of the gods, right? We've gone from sitting in front of a table of mortal terrestrial bread and wine, and because we would doresh them, we did a drush on the wine and bread itself, and by interpreting them through this homiletical process, we have captured them for the Torah. We've brought them, we've made them into Torah. It's a transubstantiation of bread and wine. That's what it is. Eat your heart out, Daniel Madden.
I'll be even better on the Christological stuff.
Yeah, and the Torah now implores you, come eat of my bread and drink my wine, right? L'chol lachmi b'lachmi shesu yain maskanti, like come and drink my mingled wine, come and have my wine that's been mixed with water, my bread with bread. It's like the Torah says this in Proverbs 9:5, but now the Torah is speaking through the bread that we have won over for Torah. The Torah is inviting you and begging you to do this. You should fulfill her wish. Please, Shinsi is inviting you to do her wish, double, twice. And that's quite something. to me, and they said, certainly so. They sat and ate, rejoiced with him. After they'd eaten, they'd lingered at the table. I think what's happening here is that we split the narrative, right? When we hit that trup, when we hit that merchak fula, whatever, I can't do it. We tore things apart, right? And we continued that, and that tear continued into the material, into the story of the characters, and they tore apart into their celestial counterparts, and now. And then we reunited Joseph with his part of the story. He knew what he had to do when he heard the dream. And then we finished off with the tendrils. We reunited Shekhinah and Kodesh Baruch Hu, and now we can reunite with the table that's in front of us. We can come back to the bread and wine, and we can see how the divine bread and how the bread and wine has become Torah, and Torah is asking us to eat her, and it's this perfect commingling between the spiritual and the material. It's this unity that they've achieved, and all that's left to do is to be there in that moment, and them eating the bread and wine is the Heros Gamos. For the Kabbalists, the act of eating is an act of uniting Kodesh Baruch Hu and Shekhinah. That's throughout the Zohar, and the sense that they eat, they rejoice, and after they eat, they linger at the table, like they don't want to leave. They're basking in this. I know this might be a bit of a new age reading of the Zohar, or like reading some Buddhism into it, but like the sense that they came to like the realization that which was in front of them, the bread and wine, is the substance of the divinity, is the substance of the Shekhinah, and all that's left to do is to sit and enjoy and linger at the table, and to have a good old time with some good bread and some good wine, and from the outside it just looks like a bunch of old dudes and one young guy eating bread and wine together, but for them they're in this overwhelming drunkenness and ecstasy, and it's been fully brought back to their mundane reality that's now being entirely transubstantiated. To me, that's what's happening here, as far as I can see.
Yeah, and I also like the imagery of like the Torah has gained them, right? Like we think of ourselves as trying to get some Torah, right? Like, oh, I received some Torah from, but the idea is that the Torah has absorbed them. It's as if the Torah has just like swallowed them up. But the Torah has gained them. And again, we've talked about this before. It's crucially important to realize that in Kabbalah, the divine needs the human as much as the human needs the divine.
Yes.
And so they have been seeking and seeking and seeking and seeking. But at this moment, right, the divine needs them. And I like that the Torah has gained them, which at some level also indicates that the Torah didn't have them yet.
Right. Which is also why they're begging. He's saying, please, and like this double begging, right?
Yeah, nah. So yeah, it's like, and it'd be interesting if they're this. And again, we're making a big deal of this section because there is something very, I think, interesting about it. But then we'll see next week. It just opens back up again, right? Like,
right. He opens saying, yeah.
And we go back into the war. Like, again, this whole section is very much like a break in the clouds. We get up above the clouds and we see the whole thing, and then we drop immediately back down into the war.
That's and that's the whole point of it, because we're not here to escape reality. No. We're here to sit at the table, linger around, enjoy some wine, and then get right back into it.
No, right back into it. Yeah, it's like Martin Buber said, right, that if you sail so high above the contradictions that they begin to resolve themselves, then you've evaded your task. Like, and this very Buberian point that we have sailed up pretty high. We're at the moment of this Hieros Gamos. We're sitting around with Yanuka and Metatron and all this stuff is happening. Right back into. I mean, and we have to send, I think, really back into some of the ugliest sections we're going to get to next week. Not just war, but just real genocidal butchery, which will be, it's an ugly section of the Torah, and maybe the whole section is one of the most ugly sections of the Torah. The whole instance of Baal Peor is just a really gruesome part of the Torah. But again, I think that's all grist for the mill of Kabbalah and Zohar, is that nothing's beyond redemption.
Yeah.
Like, the incident of Baal Peor is maybe one of the worst moments in the Torah, and maybe it's apt, right? That at this moment of intense glorification, we must sink to the depths, to the real And I made this point before we got on, is that I think I get real. The section we're going to deal with next week is more Moab and Mammon stuff, and I really get Sitra Achra Klipot vibes. But of course, it makes some sense that we've now sailed up to the very height, and the only place to go is to the depths.
Yeah, now it's Tchilatam B'Sofam, B'Sofam B'Tchilatam, as the Kabbalists have it. The beginning is wedged in the end, and the end in the beginning.
Yep. So, a beautiful section. A beautiful.
It's got me good. It got me good.
Beautiful section. All right, folks. We're 279 of 295, 296. We still have a lot of. He's just winding up. We're halfway through. We're halfway through the Yanuka, folks. We still have lots and lots more to unpack. So, I do like this. I do like the fact that we're basically halfway, maybe a little more than halfway, and this halfway mark is the moment where we get the bread and the wine finally mixed, and now we got to get to work. Like, the meal's over. Like, now the hard work begins, and I think it's unsurprising that we're going to get into this really dark stuff in just next session. Yeah,
talking about getting back to work. I'm about to get back to some lumber here that needs cutting and screwing, and back to the work. The work continues, and the work is very real.
Yeah, the work the divine work is real work, and the real work is divine work. So
yeah.
All right. Well, Zevi, thank you so much for hanging out, and thanks for everyone else for following along with us in this in the complicated world of the Zohar. We'll see folks, God willing, next week for more of the Yanuka.